momentum art making experience, instructional videos, and you are about to be delighted and learn something very special using your tools, techniques, and most important, your time. So with all the materials you have provided for you, we will start to meet your materials, starting with colored pencil by Prismacolor. The best thing to do is to begin completing the grid on the back of your card that is titled Meet Your Materials. With each colored pencil, it's best to get sort of an idea of what the color looks like on paper, how it deals with on paper, how it feels in your hand. And most of all, in this case, it's good to sort of get an idea in a small space, how to create value with the colored pencil that you have. Now, white's a kind of funny thing. So white isn't obviously something that shows up on a white piece of paper, but it can be used to blend colors if you take more than one color. Next up, we have the general watercolor pencils. We have two watercolor pencil packs in your kit. This one is one that's of lower quality, but still very good. Test these out, do the same sort of gradation. Then get your watercolor pencil, your watercolor brush, and demonstrate for yourself the use of the watercolor brush. There's a couple different things you can do with watercolor. So the pigment is in the brush, the pigment is in the pencil itself. So the more pigment you lie down on the paper, the more pigment you will see. Next up is pencils. The pencils are interesting. So there is one sketch and wash pencil in your kit, and you'll be able to demonstrate that by using a watercolor brush to apply water to the pencil. The other pencils you have are 6H, 4H, 2H, and HB. HB being the hardest, 6B being the softest. Really, the color is the same. It's just the amount of pencil that comes out. And you'll be able to also create highlights using your eraser and using the blending stump to blend. So now we get to play with the Inktense watercolor pencils. Again, color in the squares, dark to light. Use the watercolor pen brush to test out the saturation of the color and really how much interesting things you can do with the color, like blending. The Inktense, I believe, has more blendability. I believe it has more pigment. Lastly, we have the pan set of 36 different colors. My recommendation to you is to create an exact grid of what's on the pan to what's on the grid, so you can have sort of a reference of different colors. Really, this is an opportunity for you to really see what colors respond well, how in fact different they look on paper versus how they look on the pan themselves, dry. Obviously, you have to apply a little bit of water to the pan in order to get the watercolor to work. And in this case, what I've done is I have wet the paper beforehand, and then I've only applied watercolor on the left-hand side so that I can allow the watercolor that's coming from the pan set to bleed into the water and creating a lighter value. And as you can see, you can correct mistakes with a little bit of tissue. So when you're doing this, it's good to have a random napkin or paper towel at your side in case something gets a little too messy. So once you've taken the time to get the 36 colors outlined in your block, you will then begin to experiment with color. Obviously, these are all very different materials, and you've gotten a good sense of how to use the different materials just from filling out this grid on the back of your card that's included in your kit. Super important to realize how they vary. Now we're going to mix colors. We're going to do it with watercolor, colored pencil, and the watercolor pencil. We're going to start with the watercolor pan set, starting with red, primary, which is red, yellow, and blue are the three primaries. Now, when you have a little bit of red on your brush, you can apply it to help the tertiary colors. The tertiary colors are mixed with parts of the primary color. So you'll see that now that I've applied the yellow, I'm now applying it to create the orange, and then I apply the yellow to one of the other tertiary blocks, and I will begin to mix the green and the violet with that. Super important to remember, clean brush, clean water, clean brush. It's very important to clean the reservoir that holds your water often. And you can tweak a little bit and get the color exactly you want by adding a little bit more blue or a little bit more yellow or vice versa to get the exact pigment that you want. So that's the watercolor primary and secondary colors. Primary and secondary colors. Now we're going to try it with the general colored pencil, watercolor pencil. So in this case, again, I'm completing the blocks that have the primary, and I'm lightly adding. So you want about 50% coverage, whereas the larger blocks that have the primary are about 100% color. You want about 50% color, and then you can begin to add the water using your watercolor brush. And again, clean brush between colors. You are not going to do well if you go from the blue to the yellow. You're going to make your yellow green. So keep that in mind. Clean brush. Always constantly wash your brush. If you're concerned, if it's hard to tell if your brush is clean or not, if it's clean, if it brushes onto your napkin and it comes out clean, then it's clean. So that you can also tell that you can use the watercolor pencil in a couple of different ways. You can color on the paper, or you can actually take the brush to the pencil and release the pigment that way. Lastly, we'll be doing primary to secondary color chart using the colored pencils. Same sort of general application as the watercolor pencils, but in this case, it is mainly about layering and sort of sketching these things in. You have no watercolor brush to sort of smooth things out or pick things up. This is all about just lightly laying in layers, layers, layers to get the color that you desire for your secondary color. Purple is typically the hardest because really there's a whole difference between cool and warm primaries. And your violet can be either a very typical looking violet, or it can look like a garnet violet. And in the case with the colored pencils, it was definitely a cool and warm combination. So they equal 7. So thank you for meeting your materials with me.